Retired Navy Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery joining us this morning with more. He ran U.S.-Israeli military-to-military relations for 3 years during his 32 years of service and is now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you for being with us, sir.
Well, we know Israeli forces expanded operations over the weekend. Prime Minister Netanyahu said this is the second stage of war. Let's take a quick listen.
The war inside the Strip is going to be long, and we are ready for it. This is our second independence war. We are going to fight for the homeland, and we won't withdraw. We are going to fight on the ground, at sea, and in the air. We will destroy our enemy above and below the ground. We are going to fight and win.
So you reported just a couple minutes ago that this is going to be kind of a slow approach, not necessarily this full-scale ground invasion that we've been talking about. But how are we going to know that this is the full-scale situation? What are going to be the differences that we see? Because there are tanks, there was that blackout, communication-wise. What is going to be different when we see that full-scale invasion?
Well, thank you for having me. And, that's a great question because I think this is a very deliberate, patient approach by Israel. And there's several reasons for that. One is to get maximum, quality intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance so they can strike Hamas terrorists and avoid civilian casualties. And the second is they were recognizing the United States needed time to get some defense air defense systems in place and to continue to negotiate potentially for the hostages. Now, look, we'll know that this is the real deal when ground forces tend to enter and then occupy parts of territory in northern Gaza. I think that is what the second stage is to hold some areas while they launch further attacks in an attempt to find Hamas in their command and control bunkers. So seeing them hold a little bit more territory in northern Gaza will tell us that they've entered this second phase.
Israel also voicing again, urging people to get out of the northern section of Gaza Strip. Also signaled to some that whatever is coming is close to coming. I'm wondering though, this ground invasion moment, even though this isn't the full scale just yet, that has always in the last week or two of discussions been seen as a move that could potentially widen this conflict. Just based on these early actions, we've already seen widespread protests throughout the Arab world this weekend. That scene at the Russian airport is chilling for so many reasons, but just a snapshot of what this is now stirring up in that region of the world. Just aside from the military tactics, what do you think the larger implications are of Israel now officially, even slowly, moving in and beginning this second phase, as they're calling it?
And I guess who's to say they won't start that retaliation before the full-scale part even starts, right?
Also on the table.
Yeah, those are great points. First, we're 480 hours into the 24-hour warning, so I think they've given quite a bit of warning, to the citizens that were in northern Gaza to get to southern Gaza. If they haven't gone yet, it's most likely because Hamas isn't allowing them to go. So that would be the first point. The second is you're exactly right. I mean, what Israel has to be concerned about here is escalation elsewhere. So as they do this, they're going to be very carefully watching both southern Lebanon and the Golan Heights to see if Iranian-sponsored militia in the Golan Heights or if Hezbollah, another Iranian-sponsored militia, begin to open up a second front in earnest. I mean, real significant attacks that put pressure on Israel. And then finally, you mentioned a third one, which is that throughout the world now, Israel is going to be classified as the aggressor, even though this is clearly a response to a terrorist action. And you saw that in Russia, but you'll begin to see it, and you've seen it with the United Nations Secretary General, and now you'll begin to see it, I think, throughout European capitals. If we're not careful, I'm sure the United States is working hard to knock down that argument, but there's no guarantees they'll be successful.
So Gaza experienced a 36-hour internet outage over the weekend. If there were these messages telling people, continuously to leave the area, to go south, one, if there is no internet, how can people see that? There's no electricity either. So there's that question I have. But then also, if this is this a product of cutting fuel, electricity, things like that? Was this something that was just always going to happen, this internet situation, or is this some sort of tactic in some way?
So that's a great question. I think the reduction in internet is probably a product of exactly what you said: power fluctuations, loss of fuel for generators. But the sustained loss probably had a cyber information operations element to it. And look, part of it was probably to try to cease, block communications where they did some movements. And then one of the neat things is, if you're an intelligence analyst, is when the system comes back, trying to listen to what is said first. That's when you get the senior officials potentially, when they finally have communications back up online. So my guess is that there is a tactical advantage to this if the Israelis did it. And my presumption is, because it was sustained 36 hours like this, there probably was an element of Israeli cyber information operations involved.
Last question before we let you go. That appearance by Netanyahu was significant for a lot of reasons, not just because we're beginning this second phase, but because he made comments suggesting that his military and security establishment were to blame for the initial Hamas attack back on October 7th. The reaction within his war cabinet was so severe that he later had to post and basically apologize for saying that. I'm wondering what you make of the situation, and what you make of the idea that he took no responsibility himself for what happened as the head of that government. He was already in a politically perilous spot before this invasion. Things he was doing in relation to the government and the Supreme Court, protest in the street for weeks and months leading up to this moment. Then this massive security failure. He blamed others, not himself, and then had to apologize for it. Not the way you want to begin a war with your war cabinet divided and upset.
Well, that's a great point. 3 weeks, he's had 3 weeks to do the right thing, which is to say, look, and a massive strategic and tactical intelligence failure happened on my watch. I'm responsible for it. Let's set that aside, take care of business. When we've destroyed Hamas as a terrorist organization, I'll go back and take a look at what happened and hold the right people, including myself, accountable. He didn't do that. And the worst part for him is he burnishes his "I'm a national" pretty frequently as prime minister. And so he really is accountable and responsible for this. And I suspect the Israeli electorate will eventually hold him accountable. But, today he just needed to, I think the right thing to do is take responsibility and say he'll investigate it after this conflict.
Well, it's certainly secondary to other issues, but whether Netanyahu politically survives this is a whole nother issue. Retired Navy Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, thanks so much as always for your time and insight. Please come back and walk us through this. Really appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.